My parents gave my room laptop, canned car to my sister's boyfriends, so I left a goodbye note and cut ties forever without a single fight. I remember walking into the living room after school, excited to tell my parents about a project I'd spent weeks on, only to be met with a distracted nod before they shifted their attention back to Julia, who was showing off a new outfit or bragging about a minor accomplishment at school. It was never malicious, at least, not openly, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Birthdays were the worst. While my sister had lavish parties with every friend invited and presents that seemed to arrive weekly, my celebrations were quiet affairs, often overlooked, and I learned early on to suppress my disappointment. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that love wasn't about gifts or attention, but even as a kid, I felt the sting of invisibility. School projects, sports achievements, even the small wins I thought would earn praise, like helping a neighbor with yard work or earning a part-time paycheck, were barely acknowledged. Meanwhile, Julia's every minor success was amplified, replayed in family stories, and celebrated with genuine excitement. I remember asking my mom once why she never seemed proud of me, and she replied with a quick, dismissive, "You'll understand someday." Those words haunted me more than she probably realized. I wasn't asking for grandeur. I wanted recognition, acknowledgement. The basic validation that your own family notices when you try. By the time I reached my teens, I had learned to step back, to let my sister shine, and to internalize my own sense of self-worth quietly. I became reliable, responsible, and invisible, a pattern that shaped my identity and expectations from life. But deep down, I carried resentment like a quiet, pulsing ache, and I secretly wondered whether my parents would ever see me as more than the other child. That invisible positioning, that feeling of being a placeholder in my own home, would set the stage for the betrayal that would later shatter any illusions I had of familial fairness or love. After college, I finally moved into my own apartment, a tiny space, but it was mine. I had saved every penny from my part-time jobs, worked overtime, and even sold a few old belongings just to afford my first laptop and car. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of ownership over something, a small corner of the world that was entirely mine. Decorating the apartment, arranging my books, and parking my car in the driveway felt empowering, like a tangible reward for all the years of being invisible at home. I thought maybe this would be the first time I'd truly be in control of my life, free from favoritism and constant comparisons, but even this freedom wasn't fully mine for long. Julia started visiting more often without notice, bringing her friends or her boyfriend into my space. At first, I tried to be accommodating. I figured I could share. And it wouldn't hurt, but the line between polite hosting and losing control of my own home blurred quickly. She would borrow my things without asking. My laptop for just a few minutes. My books, even my small savings jar, when she claimed she forgot her wallet. My parents never intervened. Whenever I mentioned it, they would shrug or say things like, "Be generous." Family comes first, as if my hard work meant nothing. The small annoyances began to pile up, and I started feeling a creeping sense of betrayal, even in my own apartment. I realized that the pattern from home my efforts overlooked, her needs prioritized, was following me into my new life. The tension inside me grew quietly, a simmering storm that I didn't know how to release yet. I also noticed how easily Julia's boyfriend charmed my parents, even from miles away, through phone calls or casual visits. A part of me began to see that what I considered my independence might be more fragile than I'd hoped. And the first real cracks in my sense of fairness were beginning to show. Things took a sharp turn when Julia started bringing her boyfriend around more frequently. And it quickly became clear that he wasn't just a guest. He was taking up permanent space in our lives. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was overreacting, that it was just temporary, and that he was part of my sister's happiness. But his presence felt invasive almost immediately. He lounged on my couch, borrowed my chargers, and treated the kitchen like his own, leaving dishes piled up and crumbs everywhere. The subtle charm he wielded over my parents was infuriating. He could say almost anything, and they would smile, nod, and even go so far as to offer him snacks, gifts, or favors. While my input was barely acknowledged, I started noticing the contrast more keenly. While I had spent years saving, working, and sacrificing to build my own little corner of independence, he seemed to acquire privileges effortlessly, simply by being charming. My parents excused everything he did, from moving furniture to taking over shared spaces, with phrases like, "He's family now," or "just let him be comfortable." I felt increasingly invisible, the same feeling I'd carried all my life, but now amplified by the fact that this intruder had been welcomed into the life I had built with my own sweat. Even small things began to sting in new ways. My laptop, carefully maintained for work and personal projects, was now available for him to use whenever he wanted. My car, which I had bought with months of overtime pay, was repeatedly borrowed without asking. I found myself pacing silently in my apartment, gripping my keys, feeling both helpless and furious, realizing that my parents' favoritism wasn't just a childhood habit, it was now actively enabling someone else to take what was mine. By the end of this period, I knew the situation wasn't going to resolve itself. The tension in my chest became a quiet, simmering rage, and the sense of betrayal settled like a stone in my stomach. This wasn't just about things anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and finally recognizing that I could no longer count on my family to act in my interest. I started thinking seriously about how I would respond, and the first real seeds of a plan began to form. The breaking point came one evening when I returned from work, exhausted and expecting some quiet time in my own apartment. Instead, I walked into a scene that felt like a punch to the gut. My bedroom, my sanctuary, the one place I could call my own, was completely rearranged and occupied by Julia's boyfriend. My desk was gone, my posters replaced by his clutter, and personal items I'd carefully collected over the years were shoved into boxes or discarded. When I confronted my parents over the phone, their response was casual, almost flippant. "We thought it'd be better for him to have more space. Don't worry, it's temporary." Temporary. Like that word could erase years of investment, pride, and memories. I remember standing there, stunned, my hands trembling slightly, and feeling an overwhelming mix of disbelief, anger, and humiliation. This was no longer subtle favoritism. It was a blatant erasure of my presence. All the sacrifices I had made, the late nights studying, the overtime at work, the careful budgeting to build a life for myself, felt meaningless in that single moment. My room wasn't just a room. It was my personal history, my refuge from a world that had never seemed to notice me. The betrayal cut even deeper, because my parents didn't even see it as a betrayal. They were proud of their generosity and defended the decision as though they were doing the right thing. Meanwhile, Julia's boyfriend treated it all as if he belonged, lounging on my bed and casually leaving his things around. I realized that no amount of pleading or explanation would make a difference. We were firmly on his side, standing in that empty space. I felt the first real surge of clarity. My family had always prioritized her happiness over mine, and now it was blatant, undeniable, and irreversible. The emotional weight of my invisibility became almost physical, pressing down on my chest. And in that moment, I knew things couldn't stay the same. I would have to take control of my own life, even if it meant leaving everything behind. A few days after losing my room, the betrayal hit even harder. I woke up one morning to discover that my laptop, my pride and lifeline for work and personal projects, was gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd misplaced it, but a quick call to my parents confirmed the truth. Julia's boyfriend had taken it. My car, which I had saved for months to buy, was also missing, now parked permanently at their house for him to use. They told me with a casual tone we thought it would help him settle in, as if my hard-earned possessions were mere tools to make someone else comfortable. The shock and disbelief washed over me in waves. This wasn't just about stuff. It was about respect and acknowledgement. Every late night I spent working on projects, every penny I had saved, every bit of effort I had put into building my independence, it all felt like it had been erased in one thoughtless act. I thought back to my childhood, to the countless times my sister got the better gifts. The more praise, the bigger slice of attention. and realized this was just a continuation of the same pattern. Now with my adult possessions, what made it worse was how easily my parents rationalized it. They didn't see the injustice. They were proud of their generosity, completely oblivious to the fact that they were taking from me to give to someone else. The audacity of it stung worse than anything Julia's boyfriend had done. At least he was merely enjoying the benefits, while my parents actively enabled him, making themselves complicit. I felt a mix of humiliation, anger, and heartbreak. I realized that no discussion, no plea, and no logical explanation would change their minds. They had already made their choice, and I was on the outside. The emotional weight of the loss pressed down harder than ever, and I knew I had reached a critical juncture. I could either continue being the invisible, overlooked child, or take decisive action to reclaim my dignity. It was the moment when I understood that my independence and self-respect were worth far more than any possessions, and that reclaiming them might mean walking away entirely. After losing my room, laptop, and car, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. At first, I wanted to scream, to argue, to demand my things back, but something inside me held me back. I had learned long ago that confrontation with my parents rarely worked. They either dismissed my feelings or turned the situation around, so I felt guilty for complaining. This time, I decided to stay silent, to process everything on my own, and to let the anger simmer quietly. It was suffocating, but I knew that reacting impulsively wouldn't give me the satisfaction I craved. I began replaying every interaction, every subtle act of favoritism, and every moment Julia had overshadowed me throughout my life. The quiet accumulation of neglect and emotional abuse now felt like a tidal wave crashing over me. I realized that my parents weren't just blind to their bias. They were actively complicit in enabling her and her boyfriend to take what was mine. The helplessness was a new sensation, sharper than anything I had felt as a child, because now the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about attention or validation. It was about my hard-earned independence and my dignity. Yet, amid the frustration, a strange clarity began to emerge. I didn't need to fight them or beg for fairness. They had proven time and again that they were incapable of providing it. What I needed was control over myself and my own life. I started quietly mapping out my options, thinking through a way to leave on my own terms, to walk away without giving them the satisfaction of a fight or a scene. The idea of leaving silently, but deliberately, began to feel powerful. For the first time, the anger transformed into a plan. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. It was the kind of quiet, satisfying revenge that comes from reclaiming your life. The tension inside me shifted from confusion and hurt to anticipation. I knew the next steps had to be precise, deliberate, and irreversible. The moment of clarity turned into absolute resolve. The day I walked into my parents' house unexpectedly and caught Julia's boyfriend bragging. He was smirking, leaning against the counter and saying things like, "Can you believe I got the car, the laptop, and even his room?" They really just handed it all over to me. My parents were laughing, clearly amused and proud of what they considered a clever arrangement. My stomach dropped, and a cold knot of anger and disbelief formed in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing after everything I had sacrificed. After all the years of being the responsible, overlooked child, they were applauding someone who had taken what was mine without a second thought. For a split second, I thought about storming in, yelling, demanding restitution, but I stopped myself. I realized that any reaction would only give them the drama they seemed to crave, and it would still accomplish nothing. My parents weren't going to change. Their favoritism, their blind adoration for Julia and her boyfriend, was baked into the very fabric of our family. The anger I felt wasn't just about possessions. It was about respect, dignity, and finally acknowledging that I had been treated as invisible my entire life, seeing them laugh at my expense, celebrating someone else's audacity. I felt the final piece click into place. This wasn't just a pattern of neglect. It was a lifetime of it, culminating in a blatant, unapologetic betrayal. The betrayal was no longer subtle. It was a spectacle, and I realized I didn't need to participate. That day, I started mentally drafting the goodbye note that would sever the invisible chains my parents had wrapped around me. The sense of empowerment began to replace the anger of quiet. Simmering strength that told me I could leave and take my dignity with me. Leaving them to their choices, the midpoint twist was brutal. The final confirmation that nothing would change. And any hope of fairness was gone. But it also crystallized my next move. I wasn't reacting impulsively. I was preparing a measured, irreversible response that would reclaim my life on my terms. After that day, I knew I couldn't stay in a place where my worth was invisible and my life was being dismantled without my consent. I decided to leave, but I wanted to do it on my own terms, silently and deliberately. I sat down in my apartment one evening and began writing a goodbye note, a careful, pointed message that would explain my decision without giving anyone the satisfaction of a fight or confrontation. I poured out years of hurt, frustration, and betrayal, highlighting the pattern of favoritism, the disregard for my independence, and the way my parents had consistently prioritized Julia and her boyfriend over me. Every word was measured, every sentence deliberate, a blend of honesty and finality in the note. I didn't rant or plead. I laid out the facts calmly, showing them that I had seen everything and that their choices had consequences. I explained that I was leaving not out of anger, but because I valued my own dignity more than their approval. I told them that I wouldn't be asking for my things back or begging for recognition. I was reclaiming my life, my space, and my independence. Writing it felt like a release, as though years of invisible resentment were finally being acknowledged in black and white. Packing my essentials was surreal. Every item I touched, the clothes I had carefully chosen, the few personal keepsakes I could carry, reminded me of what I had endured and what I was leaving behind. But instead of feeling sad, I felt a strange liberation, a sense that finally the power had shifted. I was walking away from not just possessions, but from a toxic dynamic that had defined my life for far too long by the time. I left the note on the kitchen counter and quietly closed the door behind me. I felt an unfamiliar but exhilarating sense of control. For the first time, I was not invisible. I was choosing myself. The tension of betrayal was still there, but it had transformed into empowerment, anticipation, and a quiet, undeniable triumph. I walked out that day carrying nothing but a backpack filled with essentials. In the quiet confidence that I was finally taking control of my life, there was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, no begging for acknowledgement, just a calm, deliberate exit. As I closed the door behind me for the last time, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief because I was finally free from the toxic dynamic that had shadowed me for years. And sorrow because the family I had hoped to belong to had proven they would never see me as more than an afterthought. The streets outside my parents' house felt surreal, almost cinematic, as if the world had shifted and I was stepping into a new chapter. The air smelled fresher, the sunlight warmer, and even the sound of passing cars seemed to echo a newfound sense of freedom. Every step I took away from that house felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a tangible act of quiet revenge. I didn't need to scream or fight. The mere act of leaving on my own terms was more powerful than any argument could have been. I reflected on the irony. All those years I had tried to earn validation from people who were incapable of giving it. And yet the moment I walked away, I felt an empowerment they could never take away. For the first time, I was making decisions solely for myself, unbound by parental expectations or favoritism. The weight of resentment and invisibility began to lift, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. That day, I realized something crucial. Leaving quietly, deliberately, and without confrontation was the ultimate statement. I had regained my dignity, my space, and my agency. The betrayal was undeniable, but it no longer had the power to define me. I had turned what had been a source of humiliation and pain into a catalyst for independence, and for the first time, I felt the intoxicating freedom of choosing myself over a family that never chose me. Leaving the house was empowering, but reality hit me hard once the adrenaline faded. I was suddenly on my own with limited resources, no safety net, and the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down on me. My laptop was gone, my car was gone, and even the small comforts of home, the bed I had arranged just the way I liked. It's my favorite chair, The little mementos I had collected were all left behind. For the first time in years, I felt truly exposed. Stripped of the familiarity and stability I had clung to, even if it had been toxic. I remember sitting in a cheap motel room the first night, staring at the ceiling, and feeling a mix of grief, fear, and anger. Questions kept looping in my mind. Had I made the right choice? Was walking away without confrontation cowardly or brave? Could I actually rebuild a life from scratch? The isolation was brutal. I realized that leaving didn't erase the emotional scars of years of neglect and favoritism. It only gave me space to face them head-on. Financial stress added another layer of pressure. Without my car, getting to work was a daily struggle. Without my laptop, tasks that had once been simple became complicated. I had to learn to adapt, to find workarounds, to stretch every dollar. Each small hurdle felt magnified, and I often doubted my ability to succeed. The betrayal from my parents and the audacity of Julia and her boyfriend seemed to echo in every empty room I occupied. Yet, even at this rock-bottom point, a quiet determination started to take root. I reminded myself why I had left: for dignity, independence, and self-respect. The pain was real, but it was temporary. I began to understand that this low moment was necessary, was the crucible through which I would forge my new life. And in that dark, lonely space, the first glimmers of resilience and hope began to shine. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life from the ground up. I found a modest apartment, small but mine, and I started saving again, this time with a renewed sense of purpose. Every paycheck became a tool for reclaiming my independence, buying a new laptop, replacing essentials, and investing in things that reminded me I was building a life on my own terms. The quiet satisfaction of doing things for myself without seeking anyone's approval became my new measure of success. Each small victory felt like a subtle act of revenge against the family that had taken everything for granted. I also started noticing the psychological impact of walking away without confrontation. While my parents and Julia's boyfriend continued living in their bubble of favoritism and entitlement, I was free to structure my life around my own goals, values, and dignity. That contrast was intoxicating. I didn't need to argue or demand respect. They had already exposed their priorities. And my choice to leave quietly meant I was the one who had the last word. The most powerful revenge, I realized, wasn't shouting or exposing them. It was thriving in the life they had refused to support. Every day brought new challenges work demands, financial hurdles, and the occasional pang of loneliness, but these obstacles reinforced my self-reliance. I began to reclaim not just material independence, but emotional autonomy. The anger that had once felt heavy now fueled productivity and careful planning, turning resentment into strength. I learned to cherish the freedom of choice, the ability to prioritize myself, and the satisfaction of building a life on my own terms. By the time several months had passed, I could look back without bitterness, seeing the silent revenge unfold. My parents continued with their favoritism. Julia's boyfriend enjoyed the spoils. And yet I had achieved something far more significant: peace, self-respect, and control over my destiny. The betrayal no longer had the power to define me, my life, my rules, and my happiness were firmly in my hands. Looking back now, I can see the full arc of what happened and why leaving was the only choice I could make. Walking away without a fight was not cowardice. It was the most powerful statement I could give my family. I had spent years trying to earn recognition, respect, and love from people who were incapable of giving it, and finally, I realized that my value didn't come from their approval. I reclaimed my life not with anger, but with clarity, dignity, and deliberate action. The independence I fought to achieve brought more satisfaction than any confrontation could have. I bought a car, set up a home office, and filled my apartment with the things I loved, free from interference or judgment. Every time I worked late into the night, pursued personal projects, or saved for something meaningful, reminded myself that these victories were mine alone. The quiet revenge, the one where I thrived while they remained blind to my absence, was more satisfying than any argument or shout could have been. I also learned an important lesson about boundaries and self-respect. Family doesn't always mean unconditional love or fairness. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to remove yourself from toxic dynamics. I no longer felt resentment. Instead, I felt empowerment. My parents continued to prioritize Julia and her boyfriend. And while that might have caused them temporary satisfaction, I realized it had cost them my present support and care, things they could not replace today. I live a life defined by my choices, not their favoritism. I feel lighter, freer, and more confident than I ever did living under their shadow. I've rebuilt my life with my own hands, and that independence is the ultimate triumph. The betrayal that once seemed crushing became the catalyst for my growth. In leaving quietly, I didn't just escape their favoritism, I reclaimed myself, my dignity, and my future. And for the first time, I'm truly happy being exactly who I am, for me and no one else.